Hello Year 5 and welcome to Week 7 Thursday's maths session. Today we're going to be starting with our arithmetic paper to begin with. So if you'd like to take between 10 to 15 minutes to answer these questions. We know some of these are getting quite tricky now and some really challenging ones in there, so just do your best, and over the next and up and coming weeks we will go over lots of those different question types with you so that you can feel more confident with those. If you pause the video now, and then next up will be the answers. Okay, so here's the answers for yellow group. If you'd like to pause the video here, yellow group. And here are the answers for blue and green group. Again, if you'd like to pause the video here so you can mark your arithmetic papers too. So today then we are going to be continuing our work with decimals, and today we're going to be writing and recognising decimal equivalents to fractions. Now when we're talking about equivalence, we are talking about decimals which are equivalent, which are equal to the same value as fractions. And actually the way that we describe decimals in terms of tenths and hundreds actually make it a little bit easier to find those equivalent fractions. So in order to be successful today, we may use visual models, and we may go back to that Dean's model that we've looked at earlier this week to show the value of digits to help us. And also some hundredth squares that may be in some of your packs may also be useful today to help you recognise those equivalents. So we're just going to recap, just starting with the number 7.321. And this time I've used a Dean, which would be a block Dean, the cube Deans that you'd see at school, to represent our wholes. So we're thinking about the fact then that actually in a whole we've obviously got 10 of these to fit into one whole, 10 tenths to make a whole, 10 hundredths to make a tenth, and 100 hundredths to make a whole. And finally then we've got thousands here today, and we can see 10 thousandths will make a hundredth, and 100 thousandths will make a tenth, and finally 1,000 thousandths will equal one whole. So just a reminder there that we can use those visual models to help us. So quick recap then of the value of the different numbers in their decimal places. We've got the number here 5.724. So if we look to begin with, obviously the number 5 has a value of 5. The value of 7 is worth 7 tenths, and you can see here we've got our tenths column, we record it as 0.7, and our 2, we've got 2 hundredths, we record it as 0.02. And for those of you that have started to look at thousandths, here's our thousandths column, and we record that as 0.0 because there's no tenths, 0, there's no hundredths, 4, 0.004. This is my hundredth square, and I'm looking at each of my hundredths. 100 hundredths will equal one whole, this square being one whole. So I'm looking here at 0.30. I'm looking at 30 of my hundredths, and 30 hundredths is equal to 30 out of 100. It's also equal to 3 tenths, because actually if this is 1 tenth here, 10 of those tenths make one whole. So 30 hundredths is also equal to 3 tenths. So all of these are equal. 0.30 is equal to 30 hundredths, which is equal to 3 tenths. And we can see here the relationship. If we times 3 by 10, we make 30. And times 10 by 10, we make 100. And it is also equal to 0.3, because we know that 10 hundredths make 1 tenth. So if we've got 30 hundredths, we've made 3 tenths. Now let's relate that to a thousandth then. If we've got the same thing again, so 30 hundredths is the same as 300 thousandths, it is the same as 0.3. We just haven't got our place value holders here. This is still equal. 300 thousandths is equal to 0.3. Having a look at another example then, we're coming down here, we're looking at 70. We're looking at 70 hundredths, 0.70, 70 out of one whole, 100, is recorded as 70 out of 100. That is also equal to 7/10, and we can see the relationship there. 7 times 10 is 70, and 10 times 100, sorry, 10 times 10 is 100. We can see those equivalents there, and 70 hundredths is equal to 7/10, 0.7. Relating that to our thousandths then, for some of you, 700 thousandths is equal still to 0.7. Remember, we need 1,000 thousandths to make a whole. We've got 700, so that is equal to 0.7. Another example then, we've got here this time 50 hundredths, 0.50. Can obviously still record that, which is really important to say, as 0.5. So that is also another equivalent that we need to be aware of, is 0.5. So we're looking at 50 hundredths here. 50 out of 100 is equal to 5/10. Now if you have a look at my 100 square, you might notice that actually if I've got 50 out of 100, I've actually got another equivalent I can identify, which is actually a half. A bit of a trickier one there. So 500 out of 1,000 is equal to 0.5. Another example then we've got here is 0.25. And as you can see, if we count these, we have got 25 out of 100. Now, because we've got 2/10 and 500ths, which is also the same as 25 hundredths, we can't find equivalents to a tenth. But actually, if I have broken my 100 square in half, we know from the previous slide that would have given us 0.5. If I break it in half again, I get 0.25, because half of 50 hundredths would be 25 hundredths. That's actually a quarter of the 100 square. So a really important one to remember, and we have looked at this before in school, it's quite tricky, but 25 out of 100 is equal to a quarter. If we took 100 and we divided it into 4 parts, into 4 quarters, it would be 25 would be one of those quarters. So 0.25 here, 25 hundredths, is also equal to a quarter. So that one might be worth just jotting down. Like 50 hundredths is equal to 0.5 is equal to a half, they might just be worth jotting down to help you with your work today. And so then something else to be aware of, 250 thousandths is going to be equal to 0.25, okay? And actually that has the same value. We put our place value holder there, which we don't need. We can stay as 0.25 is equal to 250 thousandths. Even harder again then, we've just looked at 1/4 of 100, being 25 out of 100 would be equal to 1/4. If we actually think about our 100 square now and think we've got 1/4 here, our second quarter here, which is equal to a half, our third quarter here is 75 hundredths. So actually 75 hundredths is equal to 3/4 is equal to 0.75. And again then, 750 thousandths is also equal to 0.25. So this is some new learning today, Year 5, where you are going to be identifying equivalent fractions to decimals. It's going to be really important today to use the 100 squares to help you where needed, and to really go back and think about your knowledge of equivalent fractions, knowing how to turn your tenths into hundredths here, but also thinking about the fact, really importantly, coming back down to these deans, there are 10 hundredths in 1/10, there are 10 tenths in 1 whole, and also when we're thinking about thousandths as well, there are 1,000 thousandths in 1 whole, and there are 10 thousandths in 100. So you're going to work through these activities today, finding equivalent decimals and fractions, those which are equal to each other. We look forward to seeing your work today.